When you look back at your life, who would you say have been your role models, your mentors, your inspiration?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this when I was walking the dog today. I was actually, funnily enough, thinking about my mother. So my mom, an immigrant, came to the country, married my father in a mixed faith marriage. Didn't even know if his mother would accept her the first time they went back to India to meet. And she just always, her whole life, she just always worked really hard. In the beginning, she worked two jobs, 5 days a week at CAMH and then weekends at a nursing home. So just really constantly instilling a work ethic in us. And just was it, and we fought like crazy, her and I. But and she died about 2 years ago, and I really miss her, and not a day goes by when I don't think about, oh, I'd love to tell her this or talk to her about something. So yeah, I think she was really a role model for me, just in terms of how hard she worked to help our family get established in this country and help us get set up for success.
You hear about all these stories of your mom coming here and she worked so hard as an immigrant to establish herself and then the family. I'm wondering, you hear a lot about this, you need to work hard, but you also need to work smart. Do you have any insights around that in terms of how can people work hard, but also work smart?
Yeah, it's a good question. I remember growing up, my dad didn't quite get it, and he would just kind of go and do his work and come home. And my mother would say, oh, you need to be involved in this and be involved in that, or you'll never get ahead. And I think, these are things as immigrants, you don't know, right? Nobody tells you as an immigrant about networking. It's not something you ever are taught. And so she was slowly starting to see that and learn that. And so then, then we started learning that as children. But I think that's kind of a little bit of working hard and working smart. It's understanding the ways of North America and adapting to some degree, obviously without losing yourself and losing your culture, but adapting to those ways so that you can be successful. I was actually born in India. I came here when I was 18 months old. My godmother raised me for the first 18 months of my life. Funnily enough, about a year ago, my brother and I had to go back to India to sell a property my mother had there. And for the first time ever, I saw the house that I was raised in for the first 18 months of my life. I use the term house very liberally. It was extremely small. And so, it is something to go back to your roots, right? It's very eye-opening to see where you started off in life.
How was it growing up as a child of an immigrant?
It was tricky. It was tricky for sure. My parents valued education above all else, and they worked really, really hard for us. They felt it was best to put us in private school, which is what they did. And that was where everything went. All the money went to that education. We never had vacations. We never went anywhere. So in that aspect, I was different than my colleagues. I never learned how to ski. Never went to the ballet growing up. Like, these are all things, again, as an immigrant, you're different, right? There are different things that you do. There's different food that you eat. And so those differences, are stark. And in those days, you didn't talk about those differences. Whereas now people celebrate, right? They celebrate cultural differences, and it brings us greater appreciation for each other's culture. But in those days, you never really talked about those differences. So yeah, it was tricky growing up. And, I always felt like I never had the right clothes. I never had, the right any of that. I remember in high school was the year that Treat Torns, that running shoe was a big thing. I couldn't afford Treat Torns, right? So is this sort of thing that, these little things that you constantly remember.
Yeah. And as you went into the workplace, your career, did you ever face any challenges, or did you feel differently being a woman of minority origin?
I probably felt it most when I articled on Bay Street. Bay Street has, or did, I shouldn't say now, I don't know what Bay Street's like now, but in those days, it had a very privileged sort of demeanor about it. And, it was sort of like my private school on steroids. So there was a certain way of looking, there was a certain way of acting, people belong to different clubs and this sort of thing. And I felt it then. I really felt like a fish out of water. There's a lawyer, I forget her name now. I can't remember her name, but she writes as a Black lawyer about her experiences on Bay Street. And they really resonated with me in terms of how I felt. I think that was part of why I gravitated towards the public sector. The public sector just doesn't have that crisp, stark feeling to it, and it just feels a lot more welcoming. I feel like once I joined the public sector, I didn't really feel as different. It never was really an issue for me.
And you've been in senior leadership positions for a while now. Do you find in healthcare, the data tells us we don't have enough diversity. How do you feel yourself being at some of those tables?
Yeah, there were definitely tables where I felt like I was the only visible minority member around the table. Usually I wasn't the only female. I do find there are a lot of women in leadership roles in healthcare, but definitely felt like I was the only visible minority. And so, sometimes that does come with some challenges of its own, but for the most part, I have found it's been fine.
Mm-hmm. What are some of those challenges you would say?
This is a very silly challenge or comment. It's not even a challenge, but it just gives you an example. Some colleagues of mine from work at Christmas time were talking about the elf on the shelf. And I had no idea what this elf on the shelf thing was. And as I started to learn about it, as you probably know, it's this little elf that you buy and you move it around the house and it has little messages for the kids. And then, the immigrant in me is like, why would I buy a present before Christmas? It's like an advent calendar. Why would I buy an advent calendar as before Christmas? Christmas is for the Christmas gifts. So it's little things like that where you feel you can't participate or in a ritual because you didn't grow up with it. You have no knowledge what it's about. And it just it's kind of the antithesis of everything you've learned growing up. So it's just a silly example, but it's just, something where some of those differences just sort of smack you in the face sometimes.
And how can we improve diversity in senior leadership in healthcare?
Given that this is in my portfolio, it's a really good question. I've been having some conversations about this at work. And, one of the comments that I've made is, I noticed this in my own children. The children are born to feel in their heart that everyone is the same and everyone is equal, and they learn differently. It's a learned behavior. And so, I really think that if we start stressing diversity and inclusivity at a really young age and start normalizing what people now some can feel is not normal or feel is different, I think we will go a long way.
What are some of the things that you are doing at Humber?
We did our first survey of our staff, and that will help us build our diversity and inclusivity plan. We're also part of, and I'm sitting at the table for the Toronto Academic Health Science Network Anti-Racism Group. So hoping some great work will come out of that. And then, through our OHT, we have a committee, a working group that's focusing on health equity. And so looking at, health equity within our OHT, looking at health equity within vaccination strategies and so forth. There's work underway.
It's amazing. And I don't know the answer to this, and I wanted to hear your perspective. When we look at our healthcare professionals or, health administration professionals, there are people of diverse origin, but yet in the senior leadership roles, we don't see that. So what may be some of the issues or the barriers you think that they are facing?
Mm-hmm. I do think some of it is modeling. I think, not under emphasizing or ignoring the importance of modeling behavior and seeing people that look like you in senior leadership roles. I think that's really important because then it helps you understand that you can achieve those roles. I go back to this idea of career pathing and networking. Again, as immigrants, you're not taught to network. You're not taught to think about career pathing. And so, supporting those in our community to help them understand, what does a career path look like? How can you explore different options? How can you talk to different people about your career options? These are not things that come naturally to immigrants. You're never taught this. And so really sharing that, I think, will also help people understand, how do you move up into the C-suite or into senior leadership roles.
What's the best way for people to network these days?
Pandemic aside, I think there are lots of organizations. There's the Canadian College of Health Leaders as an example, working within your own organization and reaching out to others to connect. Over my career, every so often, I pulled together people in an informal network. And so, like a dinner club, as an example, just different people that I have met over my career connecting together. So I think there are just different ways to do it.